Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind those of you who are working on backlogs, just check in the www.chartingcoach.ca/backlog-buddies is a place you can come and do your backlog alongside fellow clinicians and physicians. So if you want to kind of hang out and have some ability to stay on task for the 2-hour sessions, come along. We'd love to see you there. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I am very excited to meet with and talk to Ethan Nkana, who is here to tell us about the things he's learnt in helping physicians and clinicians about their clinical day. So welcome.
Hey, Sarah, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here with you.
Yeah, perfect. So tell us about you. What are you doing that's helping physicians or clinicians in this space about their clinical day and making it sustainable?
Yeah, before we hit record, we were kind of chatting a little bit about how we help doctors. And the big way that we help doctors specifically is we work as a talent agent to help doctors negotiate better salaries in their contracts. So the big thing that people want to know is, well, can I make more money? That's what we help doctors do. And as a result, we often find that doctors need better support in their practice and better schedules and better resources. And so we help negotiate doctors' contracts holistically. So, like you said, doctors' days, not just practicing, but they can be better because they're not focused on my crummy contract, my pay, all the things I'm not getting paid for. We help take that burden off of doctors' minds.
Interesting. How did you end up here? How did you end up helping in this way?
I think it's a little bit of I was kind of always meant to do this, and I kind of also had this happen to me in a sense. So the happen to me part is in 2019, I was laid off from a corporate hospital job that I had, and it was absolutely devastating to me. The reason it was so devastating is because I wanted to be a hospital CEO. That was my whole grand plan, was to follow in my mom's footsteps. My mom's a doctor, so I'm not smart enough to be a doctor, so I thought I'd go a different route. And it just turned out that after 15 years, my career in hospitals came to an end. And in that experience, I had this lingering question: why don't doctors have agents like professional athletes? And that question was kind of like an earwig, like that song that you cannot get out of your head, right? So I called my mom. Again, she's a doctor, she's an anesthesiologist. And I said, who helps you negotiate your contracts? How do you know how much you should get paid? And I was yelling into the phone. And from there, this idea of doctors having an agent like your favorite movie star or artist or athlete. Doctors spend 20, 25 years in training, they go pro. Athletes hire agents, but doctors often try to DIY it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're here to help level the playing field for doctors in contract negotiations with employers.
Interesting. What were you noticing about physicians and their day that made you feel like they needed an agent?
There's not enough time, Sarah. Anybody who has listened to this podcast has probably said something like this to a friend or a colleague. There's just not enough time in the day. And then on top of that, if we want to get into the reality that our clinicians experience, it turns into not just, hey, you're doing a good job. I need you to be busier. I need you to see more patients. I need you to lead this clinical quality committee. And then on top of that, I need you to do all of your charting and all of that, which ends up getting pushed to when you're sitting at home on your kitchen table for many of the doctors that I work with. And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, there's this pressure for clinicians to do more with fewer and fewer resources, which, if you do the math, that leads to burnout. And nobody's built to do more with less, but that's what we've asked. Think about the last 4 years. Think about the burden we put on the healthcare system, on our clinicians. Have we honored them for that financially or otherwise?
Got it. Okay, interesting. So you are seeing that, well, I guess from your perspective, looking out, looking in at the physicians working, you're not seeing them being adequately reimbursed for the amount of hours that they're putting in as just step one of what you're noticing.
Exactly. That's step one. And usually that stems from a non financial issue, which is you're asking me to see patients way too fast for me to do my job at a high level. I don't have the tools, resources, or supplies to do my job at the highest level. And then on top of that, access issues. I can't even get patients in for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks because of things that are outside of my control as a doctor. And so, to your point, yes, the financial part tends to be a symptom,
Mm-hmm.
but really where clinicians I think are more frustrated, it's on the non-financial pieces of I need I just want to be a good clinician. I just want to take the best care of my patients. I need the resources, staffing, support, supplies to do that. They're
Mm-hmm.
not asking for a whole lot. And you've probably seen, what do you see? I mean, do your clinicians feel like they have what they need to perform at the top of their license?
I was actually just listening to a podcast on diversity, equity, and inclusion today, and it was really awesome. And if I can find the name of the interviewers inside the podcast, it was fantastic. But they were talking about that piece of even just asking what do you need, and having that insight into how do we help level the playing field here, in that what is it that you need, because each physician and clinician is going to come back to that question with a different answer, and many of them are not saying I need more money. They're actually saying, I want to be I want to be recognized for this work, or I want to be able to see my patients back in a more timely manner, or I want to be able to open a few more appointments in my schedule so that I can get back the critical patients, because right now I will just sacrifice myself and my lunch break or my after work to get them in because they need to be seen. And I'm not going to sacrifice their health because the system won't bend to that.
That is so well put. And it's unfortunate that the business of medicine has gotten to this point where we feel like clinicians are almost ancillary to the healthcare system. They're just cogs in the wheel that if you just plug them in, the healthcare system will run. And that's just not reality. As you mentioned, doctors are, no matter how many family medicine doctors I talk to, I've never talked to two who are identical, who have the same priorities in their practice or same goals for how they provide care. Every doctor is unique and they deserve to be able to provide care at the highest level possible, because who benefits? Patients benefit. Patients benefit from happy doctors, and hospitals and employers know that.
Yeah, yeah. What other so if you were just looking at because you've probably got a better insight into what doctors are earning within the areas that you work, are you noticing differences within the different populations of doctors?
Absolutely. So you certainly see differences among specialties and even geographic regions around the US. But one of the things that I found to be quite disturbing, my mom actually pointed out right when I started my firm, and it's the salary gap for women doctors and doctors of color. So just to call it out, there's a ton of data out there that doctors can Google, but I've aggregated a lot of it where you can see that women physicians both generalists and specialists are paid lower, substantially lower than their male counterparts for the same jobs, same work, same schedule, same, critical patients. And then likewise, doctors of color also earn less. And so one of the missions as a part of my business has been to educate doctors on how to prepare for success in your contract. So, yes, we can help you and we're here for you. And we want doctors to know how to advocate for the best contract for their practice and ultimately for their patients.
Okay. So this would be a salaried position and they're being just offered less off the bat?
Yeah, there's actually a ton of data out there that shows. So if you look at, just to stay on the gender lines for a moment, if you look at generalists, women generalists make in the ballpark of 30 to 40, sometimes $50,000 less than their male counterparts. And then secondarily, specialists. So this is from a resource called Medscape, which publishes annual surveys of physician compensation where they aggregate all this data. Secondarily, when you look at specialists, those women are making about $96,000, so about six figures less than their male counterparts for the same work. Now, there's copious data out there also for people justifying those imbalances, but there's nothing that I've seen in the literature that would support why women doctors are paid less than men. And yes, to answer your question specifically, we're talking salary to salary, job to job. I see it all the time with doctors I negotiate for. The overwhelming majority of my clients are women, and we always end up getting them more money. Well, why is that? Because they're underpaid to begin with.
Very interesting. Is there anything that takes into account hours spent within that salary?
Yeah, there is. And there are people who would say that because women historically work fewer hours than men, that then in turn they should be paid less. But I don't agree with that. And the reason I don't agree is for two reasons. One, the data also shows that women spend more time with patients. And when you spend more time with patients, data shows you have better outcomes, you have better patient satisfaction. And the data also shows that they do administrative things above and beyond just the clinical work. So, yes, you can certainly account for hours, but this is looking job to job, hour to hour. Women are paid categorically less than men for the same work.
I think I was coming at it from almost the opposite. So if they were employed for the same number of hours and salaried, do we have any data about how long it takes men versus women to do that? Because I'm thinking that if there is a difference in women working in the evenings and weekends compared to men, but I haven't seen any data at this stage.
Interesting. Yeah. So I do think there's now Medscape would be the best resource for this. They show how many hours a week men work versus women work. Now, of course, these are what people report. Now, I don't know how that correlates to that disparity in pay. It's like, well, they're working more and being paid less. I don't know exactly what that math is. I haven't gone that far into the analysis because for me, the analysis begins with why are my women doctors being paid so much less than their counterparts? And let's fix that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So we're not absolutely not going to disagree on that part. I'm just noticing from my perspective the under earning that occurs because this zero 0.8 position is taking more than a 1.0 to complete.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't gone that far into the analysis, but I certainly think there could be some data to illustrate what that, kind of what that distinction is between what men work and women work and how that exacerbates that underpayment.
Yeah. And it may not even be a gender piece. It's just curious, isn't it? So more questions than perhaps that we could answer today, but that's okay. All right, let's move now into other things. So you now take this person who turns up and says, okay, I want to negotiate a new contract. Where do you start? What are you sort of looking at? What are you working with them on? What are the things we're thinking about when we're trying to put together a package, a contract?
We always start with the same thing, and that is what is important to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So much of a doctor's experience is dictated to them. Med school, residency, and then when they come out for the first time of training, they finally have this opportunity to say, hey, this is how I want to do things. And so we sit down with them and we always start with what matters to you. We rank 7 different things that doctors tend to express to us are important. And the top 3 things are always ranked as the most important. It's my flexibility and stability in my schedule. So a lot of doctors get burned out working call, extra hours, additional shifts. It's having free time for my personal ambitions outside of my practice. And then lastly, being fairly compensated. Now, those 3 rank differently for every doctor we talk with, but it's always those same top 3 of 7 things. And so we always start with what matters to you. And then we lean on the 15 years that we worked in hospitals and translate that into terms that your employer can understand. And then we go to your employer and say, hey, we need you to pay Dr. Smith better, or else she's going to pursue one of these other alternatives that we brought to her that improve her practice, give her better support, and spoiler, pay her a bunch more money to do it.
So these are people already employed. It's not even looking at that new job. It's looking at that, what's happening for you, and is that okay?
Exactly.
Very interesting, right? So I get a lot of pushback when I ask questions like, so can we create more time in your schedule to be able to get these people back? How do you get acknowledged for doing that virtual care work? How are you getting acknowledged for the email message that kind of turned up inside COVID? I don't think it was unique in Canada, or maybe not the whole of Canada, but it was kind of new that this portal thing would occur because of the changes that had to be made to become virtual with our patients in COVID. So we saw a lot of innovation in the area of looking after patients, not necessarily eye to eye, face to face. But I think the US was doing this much longer because of the way that their EMRs were working, and they had patients enrolled in these portals already. But I see a lot of burden of these. If there's less access, there's increasing volume of things coming in through these virtual portals. And some places are charging, some are not. Some are compensating physicians, some are not. Like, it is so different across the landscape because I hear all of the stories. And I'm so curious when I get pushback of, no, they'd never agree to that. Like, oh.
Interesting. Do your clinicians tell you that?
Yeah, physicians and clinicians are all,
Interesting.
so whatever is set up is how it is. And some of them have, of course, when we bring some of those stories forward in here, come back to the employer and said, hey, where's the give and take here to have a little bit more wiggle room with some of their day-to-day routines and expectations. But a lot of them are like, this is just how it is.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point that I think a lot of doctors and clinicians in general would really relate to. When you think about any industry, technology is probably the best example. There's always new innovation and advancements. And the only industry I worked in is healthcare, specifically hospitals. And it moves so slowly, even when you're doing the right thing for the patient. There's so many layers of bureaucracy and approvals that it's almost impossible for clinicians to have agency in their job. So much so that I've had people who I admire say, I feel disposable in my job. And so I think you hit on a point that many doctors I work with would relate to, which is it is extremely difficult to get anything done that's not the way it currently is in healthcare, specifically hospitals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It is a slow moving target if you're trying to make changes.
The stakes are so high. Like, why wouldn't you want to always be at the cutting edge of how many times when I worked in a hospital, I had a new idea, and I would have to go to infection prevention and nursing and environmental services and get everybody bought in to do something that we all know from a common sense perspective is best for the patient. But because it's different, I could never wrap my head around that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We often joke that a lot of the systems were not created for us, right?
Mm,
They
yes.
are not created. They might be created so that we can collect more data or more information, but they're not created for our workflow or with the end users in mind,
Yes, yes.
particularly.
I've heard that as well about some pretty prominent EMRs, that they're just accounting systems. They're not built for doctors and clinicians to navigate them easily or efficiently.
Yeah, exactly. Or patiently. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Given that we just recently migrated to a new one, I hear a lot of farmers' voices coming out at work. All right. Tell us some ways that have physicians have come up with innovations within their day to help them create sustainability. So what have you seen that you've like, oh, I would never have thought to ask that out of a contract? Like what sort of things have you seen physicians asking for?
I think the biggest thing for most doctors, I don't know if it's cutting edge, but it's more so protecting your time. I
Mm-hmm.
think what doctors have found is that if there's time in your day, your employer is going to find some way to fill it for you. And then that starts to encroach on after hours. And then that turns into call and committees and recruitment for this new doctor that's coming in. So, in my view, the most impactful thing that doctors tend to talk to me about, which I didn't appreciate as being a concern when I first started the firm, is how do I protect my time? And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't even talk about the doctors who prioritize their side hustles. Hey, I serve on the board for a certain medical society, or I use my license for medical mission in my free time. There's all of these other things that doctors want to do that when your employer is just taking everything out of your time, it becomes almost impossible.
Got it. Okay. How do you advocate for protected time? Tell me how that would look in a contract.
So the biggest thing that we talk about is clinical contact hours. So for clinicians, doctors, anybody who works with patients, you have kind of your HR schedule, which usually is on an FTE basis, which
Yeah.
stands for full-time equivalent. That's usually 40 hours.
Mm-hmm.
For my doctors, we always talk about two primary components. One, your patient contact hours. How many hours are you actually supposed to be seeing patients in a week? And then on top of that, your call schedule. Call is one of the most, so after hours clinical work is one of the most common things that I get complaints about from doctors who say, I'm burned out. They're taking way too much. I'm doing way more than what we agreed to, and I don't have anything left. And so protecting your time by saying, I'm going to work a maximum of X number of call shifts or after hours shifts in a given period of time is one primary way to create that boundary around your time in terms of call.
Okay. All right. So if we're doing that, so if we've got doctors on contracts saying I'll sign up for this many call hours, and then we get the hospital saying, but I've only got X number of you, and that leaves 5 days a month where there's no one on call. Now what? Is that we could go back to the doctors and ask them nicely if they'll fill in those extra, or is it now we're asking the hospital to find those people to fill in? Like where is the give there then? What happens next? Anything that you've seen?
I think you and I know the reality is doctors just do it. Doctors, if patients need to be taken care of, doctors will do it. Now, there are some hospitals that are able to protect that because doctors stand up for themselves and say, I'm not doing more than 1 in 4 call or a Q3 call. So if you're asking me to do more than that, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to pay me for that, and that number is going to be exorbitant for me to take on extra shifts. But the more ideal scenario is the hospital, the health system, the practice is going to have a pool of doctors that they can reach out to who can cover on call shifts on a per diem basis or an as needed basis. So the hospitals that do it really well, they have that pool of doctors available to cover ad hoc gaps in the call coverage. But doctors at the same time must stand up together and say, I'm not going to do more than what we agreed to. Because once you do, that won't stop.
Third option is that it gets shut down.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
I mean, it's happening all over Canada, whether it be small emergency departments is just a sign on the door saying, move along, this is not the hospital that's open tonight.
There you go.
I mean, it's frightening as physicians, and there's so many hours you can work in a month, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what the experience is showing, that we can't work at a dangerous level. We've had smaller ICUs have to close down and then have everybody sent across to the bigger hospitals because the small pool of generalists who are running those ICUs say this is a dangerous number of very high acuity patients that we cannot look after 24/7 without, creating dangerous ideas for our patients. So
exactly. And ultimately, in my view, I believe that it always comes back to the patient. How do we make sure that the doctor is in the best possible position to provide the highest quality care? I don't want my doctors worrying about student loan debt. I don't want them worrying about the fact that Dr. Jones is making $50,000 more than me for the same job. I don't want to worry about this is the third night I haven't seen my family this week. I don't want doctors worrying about that. I want you worrying about about providing the best care for your patients. Mm-hmm. Let me take all that other stuff off of your shoulders.
Yeah. Like it. Okay. Do you think, is there growing interest in this? Are you seeing like increasing kind of curiosity about what you do?
Yeah, we certainly have a lot more doctors who recognize that medicine is a business. And that was far before me. I think a lot of doctors are open to what we do because they realize they're getting taken advantage of. Or the more practical reality for doctors is you get zero training in contract negotiation, business. But then when you go pro, someone like me sitting on the other side of the table, I went to law school. I've only done one thing in my career. Who do you think has the advantage there? It's the same as if I were to go into your clinic and try to take care of your patients, right? Like that would be nonsensical because I have no training in that, despite how many episodes of Grey's Anatomy I can binge tonight. And so my job is to help provide support for doctors when they recognize that I deserve better. I've worked way too hard for this. And we're here to help you actualize and bring to reality the vision you have, not just of your practice, but of your life.
I think another advantage is you get to see a lot of contracts.
Yes, yes. I've seen probably more than my fair share of contracts in my lifetime. That's for sure. I dream about them now.
Because I think that just having to look at a contract makes us very unpleasantly unhappy. Clammy skin, too many big words, right? Too many pages.
But I think the same thing applies for us in medicine. How many times have I heard? I went to go see a rheumatologist a couple of years back. I didn't even know what a rheumatologist was. I had to Google that. So nonetheless, you should know that everything he told me, I had to research, right? But those were things that were second nature for him that he could explain with his eyes closed. And so I advocate for doctors to focus your time, energy, and attention on what you do best and let us take the burden of, reading these laborious contracts off your shoulders for you.
Yeah, I think the message stays consistent with the physicians and clinicians do physician and clinician work. Yes. Right? It's what we say about using your team, delegating tasks, managing your in-basket, managing messages. Like the number of things we're doing that is not physician or not clinician work. right?
Exactly.
Daily, on a daily basis, Ethan would be like horrified at the sorts of things we do for.
I'm not surprised. I know that like some of the doctors I work with become friends, and so we end up. I had a couple of doctors at my wedding a few months ago, and so I hear the horror stories of the things of patients getting double booked and doctors having to do their own scheduling. I mean, it's it's hard out there for doctors, and a big part of my job is listening and understanding what you're going through and how can we help you bring to reality the vision you had of your practice when you were in training.
Yeah. Now, coming at it from you're not a physician, but your mum was, and then you were interested in being in the hospital, though you didn't necessarily want to do the whole, becoming a doctor piece. She must have done something right for you to have an interest in the field of medicine, hospitals, anything like that. Tell us what she did. What was all that about? Tell us about mom and that growing up experience with a mum doctor.
You are very generous saying that I decided medicine wasn't for me. I haven't officially made that decision. I think that was made for me. But the coolest thing about my mom being a doctor is I never saw her as a doctor. I always saw her as my mom who helps people. And as an anesthesiologist, there was this one when I was 11 years old, I had a procedure done on my chest that my mom was a part of. And that was the first time I actually, oh, so she does go somewhere in the scrubs and people listen to her. But when I was in high school, and transitioning into college and thinking about what I wanted to do with my career, that was the first time she planted the seed and said, you need to get a job in healthcare because you'll always have a job. There's always going to be people who are sick who need to be cared for. I didn't appreciate what that would turn into from there. It wasn't like I had this plan from there in high school or anything. But my first job out of college was in a hospital. And from there, I saw just about everything you could do in a hospital, from the emergency room, ICU, supply chain, you name it. And now my mom is, I'd probably say, my most valued advisor when it comes to helping me understand, why don't more doctors stand up for themselves? Why don't more doctors demand better from their employers for their patients? And she has been instrumental. And I mentioned earlier, she was the one who pointed out the initial salary gap for gender and race that I would have never even considered when I started the business. And so working with her, or sorry, growing up with her, I never saw her as a doctor. And then now I get to work with doctors. And so we talk just about every day about different things that we're working on, how to help doctors. And so it feels like this is what I was always kind of meant to do, even though I had to lose my job to get here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think that physicians and clinicians thought their jobs were secure, and then COVID came, and some of them, it was not suddenly secure, and that was very unsettling. Like you had explained, the unsettling of you're out. It's like, what do you mean I'm out? I'm important.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
help. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. How can people find you, Ethan, if they're looking for help in these areas that we've talked
Yes.
about?
We put all the answers to the test on our socials for doctors and clinicians to find. So, first and foremost, on Instagram, we are at Physician Agency. And then we also put a lot of our resources on LinkedIn. It's my first name and last name. Just this week, we are getting ready to launch our new brand YouTube page where we're going to have actual long form educational workshops on how doctors can negotiate contracts. So it'll be physician agent on YouTube as well, which will be the best place.
There we go. That sounds fun. Anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about today?
The only thing I would say for any clinician who's listening, who's frustrated, you may need to go to grow. I'm not saying you have to leave your job. I'm not saying you have to leave your city. But if you think that things are going to get magically better by sticking around and giving it time, I'll give you a spoiler, it's not.
active participation. Yes, if we want new things, we have to go make them happen. It's even if you stay where you are. Like I knew I wanted different right where I was. I wasn't leaving the town. I wasn't going to change my job. I wasn't going to go hire a whole bunch of new staff, buy new EMRs, see less patients. Like all of that was staying the same, but something had to change. And so that's kind of where I coach physicians and clinicians, and you're like, and if you want more money, if you want better conditions, it doesn't necessarily need to be leaving. There's still options. What are they? Go find them.
Exactly.
This has been fun. Thank you so much for coming on the call. And I'm hoping that people get a little bit of imagination about what they would like and desire and then figure it out. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a delight.
It has. Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.